Hello, friends. So this is the sixth video lecture on the topic of middle childhood. In this one, I want to wrap up the discussion about cognitive development. We left off in the previous lecture with the theories of language development, and in this slide, it makes reference to reading, and specifically the methods, the two primary methods of learning to read. We talk about reading and learning to read in the discussion of middle childhood because this is a really critical and a pivotal, a key thing that comes out of middle childhood. Two of the main approaches are what we would call a phonics based, and then the whole language. I learned using phonics, and that's where you sound out words. And the other theory is the idea of a whole language approach, which is reading words and sentences in context. I'm not up on the theory of the current practice of language, of learning to read, but I have been under the impression that there has been a return to the phonics approach. It would be curious to ask you what your method, how did you learn? Do you remember if you learned to sound words out? And if you have children, how are they learning? Are they learning how to sound words out? There is also a brief discussion about learning disabilities, because this is a period, remember we've been talking about standardized tests, so this is a stage of life and of child development where, because we have standardized tests, and one of the advantages and probably purposes of standardized tests is that we are able, or professionals are able, to identify children who need special assistance, who are not learning at the rate that is normal for their age. So we have the discussion about your textbook breaks down the difference between a learning disability and a learning disorder. To be completely honest with you, it doesn't offer enough difference between the two that it makes a whole lot of sense to me, but they characterize learning disability as the difficulty of learning in a specific domain. So specifically around reading or around math or around spatial processing. Learning disorders are difficulty learning in a typical manner. So yeah, what those differences are not completely clear to me. It's very vague, but your textbook does offer some more explanation of learning disorders and learning disabilities in this context. And I have actually turned this into a quiz, a single topic quiz that breaks them down. So according to the DSM-5, learning disorders, and let's read what that definition again. Learning disorders are difficulty learning in a typical manner. So typically, the way a child would be taught to read, a child that is struggling to learn to read the way it is offered in school might be diagnosed with dyslexia. I was identified in the fourth grade as having a reading difficulty learning. But my parents argued that it was because we had moved from a old poor rural school to a city school. I don't know, but dyslexia is the term associated with difficulty learning to read. We have dyscalculia. Oh man, I actually listened to these, which refers to learning of math and mathematical processes. You have dyspraxia, which is associated with motor coordination. So a child who cognitively is able to do all the other things, but they're very clumsy or they have difficulty learning how to move their body through space. Dysgraphia, that might be a spelling mistake on that one. I thought there was a S in there. Dysgraphia. This is learning how to write and create letters. Then we have audio processing disorder, which is where people have trouble obviously processing the things that they hear. Visual processing disorder, where children have trouble processing or recognizing patterns or recognizing things that they see. Also discussed here are a group of disorders. Let's look at that definition again. Disorders are difficulty learning in a typical manner. So a disorder in this case would be difficulty learning speech and language. Aphasia, which is interesting that it's here because I have a section on my general psychology class about aphasia. This is difficulty processing or comprehending speech. And depending on, in my psychology class, I use it to illustrate the role of different brain structures in speech. And when we have aphasia, when we have damage to one part of the brain, a person may not be able to produce speech. When there is damage to another part of the brain, a person may not be able to comprehend speech. But that is a generic term for the difficulty processing or comprehending. Then we have an articulation disorder, which is the term given to a child's inability or a person's inability to produce speech in a way that's understandable. And your textbook has a brief reference to, like, children at the age of 3, it's not uncommon. Like, it's okay if adults don't understand what they say, but by the time a child is 5, they should be able to produce speech and sentences in a way that an adult can understand them, that a stranger can understand them. So if they have not done this, they might be diagnosed with an articulation disorder. Fluency disorder has to do with the rate of speech, right? And the rate of producing sounds that go together. Stuttering is, as I see it or understand it, is a kind of fluency disorder. And this is where a person, well, you know what stuttering is. A person repeats the same sound or stretches the same sound out for a long time. Most people, your book suggests that children who start off with a stutter, like 75% of them will stop stuttering. And then a voice disorder has to do with the ability to control and regulate the volume and the pitch of their speech. So, point being is that there are lots of things, ways of being, disorders, disabilities that get diagnosed at this stage of life as a child is developing language, as they're learning to read, as they're learning to use language, process language, create language. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And in the next slide, I will talk about social disorders, or social and emotional development.